Corinne. Yeah.
Why would we fast in like this whole now? If we know that when Mashiach comes, when we fast in like the Shemet, isn't there the right thing and the wrong thing?
Oh, I'm surprised to hear you ask that. Obviously, Psak Halacha is sensitive to conditions. When you have a temple, a psak is one way. When you don't have a temple, a psak another way. When the majority of Jews live in the land of Israel, some laws apply. When they don't live in the land of Israel, some laws, the same laws don't apply. Now, obviously, the law is sensitive to the conditions under which you're operating. And it's not as if the change will be just a date on a calendar. It means that the condition of the Jewish people will be an entirely different condition. That's the basic idea. What's right depends upon the conditions that you're living under. That's a statement, I think, that's attributed to the Arizal. I'm not sure whether it really is genuine or not. I've heard people questioning it, but it's not an impossibility because it means the conditions will be such that the appropriate halacha for those conditions will be a different halacha.
If we believe God to be all good, even the things that we call so-called bad are for the good, so does God have Bechira? If psychologically he's incapable of doing anything that's evil, does he have Bechira?
Okay, first of all, let me translate what you said. I think you said it very well. I hope you meant exactly what you said. God is all good, and even the things that are bad are for good. They're not good, they're for good. That means an all-good being can create evil. There's no inconsistency there. As long as the evil that's created is a means to a good. But then the question is, if he can only do that which is either good or for good, because he is all good, do we credit him with, now the term Bechira in Hebrew is usually translated as free choice. That's the way it's translated. First of all, let me point out that free choice and free will are not the same thing. In particular, the word free is a negative concept. Free means no interference, no external causation. Free from external causation. So now, let me replace your question with a different question, at least at the outset. Let's ask whether God has free will. He wills something to take place. Is his will free? Free means free from external causation. Well, he's free in spades. Nothing external to God causes God. Causes God's existence or to do anything or controls him or forces him? Obviously not. So as long as free will means just free from external causation, which is what it ought to mean, then the question doesn't start. He's free in spades. Of course he's free. Now, the point that introduces confusion, and is where you're coming from really, I think, is that when you talk about free will in human beings, the meaning of freedom is the same, but you face an immense engineering problem. Free will in a human being would mean the will is free from external causation. But a human being is a creature created by God. Not created by God once upon a time. Our view of creation is that it's continuous. It's being continuously created by God. How could anything about a human being be free? Free would mean free from God's causation, because God's causation is external to the human being. Here you face an engineering problem. The definition is the same, but how could it possibly be true? So the answer to the engineering problem is God creates us with two contradictory motivational sets. That's why a human being is a compound of soul and body. No other creature is a compound of two elements in tension with one another. Every other creature is one-dimensional. Only human beings are two-dimensional. They're two-dimensional because freedom requires conflict and motivation. And he gives us an ability to choose between the conflicting motivations. A good inclination and an evil inclination, two alternative possibilities, each of which motivates us, draws us, and the power to choose between them is how you engineer freedom from external causation. It's not the definition of freedom. Definition of freedom has nothing to do with alternatives and opposing motivations and so forth and so on. That has nothing to do with the definition of freedom. Freedom means free from external causation.
So then does God have choice?
Oh, okay. So now you're going just a little too fast, but that's right. That's the next question. So the fact that we have two alternatives and they both draw us and we choose between them is only how we engineer freedom from God's causation. When there are alternatives, both of which are not only possible but attractive, and it's my choice to determine which one I do, then that's attributed to me. It's not something that God programmed into me. If all my motivation was on one side, I had no competing motivation, then I would be blindly following that motivation. That motivation would be programmed into me by God, and that would all be God's causation, and that wouldn't be free. That's why this is the solution to the engineering problem. Does God have free choice? I don't think so. But God does not have choice between alternatives. God will always do what is best.
So then the follow-up is, in your sheer reality of evil, so I mean this is how I understood what you were saying, is that what it means that God made us in his image and gave us the greatest good is that he gave us the ability to be like him in the sense that we can choose.
Yes, but like is a very broad, bland term. As Maimonides says in the guide, there's a verse in the prophets which says, the prophet says, I am like a pelican in the wilderness. Maimonides said, the prophet did not have feathers, and he did not stand on one foot, and he didn't hide his head under his wing when he went to sleep, right? He meant he's lonely, like a pelican in the wilderness would be lonely. He's similar in that he has loneliness, that's all. Now, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, in the Way of God, chapter 2, spells this out in detail. We are similar to God in that God is self-determined, and we are self-determined. But, number one, God's self-determination is total and necessary, whereas ours is partial and accidental, that is to say, not necessary to our nature. So the extent of it is different, and the way in which it's achieved is different. For us, it's achieved by having a good inclination, evil inclination, and choosing between them. And for God, it's achieved by being absolutely independent of any other force. So what we have in common is just what we call the bottom line. The outcome that something about us is due to us only, and everything about God is due to God only. And in that sense, we have a feature of similarity. But the way in which it's achieved and the extent to which it's true is different in both cases. And he's explicit about that. Yeah, what else is on?
When we come to rule, laws, like nowadays, we have to follow the greatest rabbis in generation.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is a very widespread misunderstanding. When we had a Sanhedrin, so then it was a vote of 71. The greatest rabbi and the smallest rabbi in the Sanhedrin counted equally for one vote. There was no sense in which the greatest rabbi's opinion was the one that determined the outcome of the vote.
The greatest rabbis, the 71 greatest rabbis.
That's right.
So it follows down nowadays as well. We generally follow the greatest rabbi. When the greatest rabbis have a machlokas or an argument, and we kind of go with the majority of those rabbis.
No, that isn't what happens. In fact, the Satmar Rov was famous for opposing this ideology. That was one of his complaints against forming the group called Agudas Yisrael, that you're going to have a set of leaders, and they're going to get together and vote. He says you're pretending to have a Sanhedrin. Only the Sanhedrin can compel the minority to agree with the majority. If you don't have a Sanhedrin, you cannot do that. You have something much, much weaker, and that's called consensus. If virtually all the rabbis in a particular area agree on a policy or agree on a particular legal decision, that can become binding for that area in which they are the consensus. But 60-40, 70-30, absolutely not. What happens is that each individual chooses his rabbi from whom he'll take his instruction or take his legal decisions, and he takes them from him. He takes them from him consistently, and he does not have to be a member of the majority. Does not have to be.
So you're saying that Gedolim, the idea of having greatest rabbis nowadays doesn't really apply.
Well, of course it applies, because there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. The Mishnah, actually, in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers, says twice, the Selech HaRav. Make for yourself a Rav. And Maimonides explains one of them is for teaching you, and the other is for giving you legal decisions. And there's a Rav in America whose name I've forgotten, unfortunately. I learned a lot from him. He asked me once, does that mission apply to everybody? Everybody? Or do left-hand people not have to apply? Or blue-eyed people don't have to apply? If you're 6'3", you don't have to apply. The Mishnah applies to everybody. So when anybody says anything, you can always say, who's your rabbi? And when he says Reuven, so who's his rabbi? And that means you have an automatic chain to the top. Now, you can get to the point where you have someone who's not clearly outclassed, certainly not outclassed in every area by anybody else. Then you will have these chains leading to the top. And that the idea of being a Godel, being one of the leaders of the generation, is that a chain stops with him.
How do we know where the top of the chain is?
I'll tell you, it's really not a difficult question. It's no different, in my mind anyway, than knowing who's the top mathematicians, or who are the top football players, or who are the top violinists. Right? You don't play the violin. How could you possibly find out who are the world's top violinists? Wouldn't that be an impenetrable mystery? Not at all. You know people who play the violin. You know people who go to university and study with violin teachers. Find out who did they study by. When they have a very difficult passage, whom do they consult to find out how to play the passage? And you have a chain of expertise to the top. It's true in any field, and it's true with Gedolim as well. Everybody says, "Oh, his decision came down, so that's the decision we have to follow." The top people who are at level 2 or level 3, when they have difficult problems, who do they go to get? So you have a chain of expertise to the top. There's very little dispute about this. Yes, if you have, let's say, the top 25 people, some will say that this one is number 17, and some will say he's number 9. But you're not going to have someone say someone says number 17 and say he's third rank. Doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. Yeah.
What is Judaism's response to the Christian doctrine of original sin, and how do we prove it? I guess.
Well, I don't know that we need I don't know we need a response. You know, they have a belief system. They made it up. Do I have to respond because they made something up?
Or how do we differ with it? I guess.
Oh, now here is something very interesting. A lot of the ideas that you find in Christianity have a Jewish base. Only they pushed it beyond its normal limits, beyond its appropriate definition. They borrowed elements from Greek mystery cults and combined it. So you will find some similarities. By the way, I should insert a footnote here. Very often I'll say the Torah believes X, and someone will say, but Christians believe X. I hope you understand that's not an objection. You know, Christians might get something right. We are not anti-Christianity. We're not here to show that everything in Christianity is wrong. We are what we are, and if they agree, wonderful. If they don't agree, then someday they'll have to learn to change their positions. So now, did the first 2 human beings in the Garden of Eden fail? Did they commit a terrible sin? Yes. Is the world suffering from that? Yes. The whole world deteriorated from that original condition. The human beings' environment, the human beings' body, the soul's powers are greatly reduced because it has to relate to a very degraded body. That's all true. Does it change the nature of our challenge, our task, and our resources? Definitely. All of that is true. Maybe there are more. There are 2 glaring differences between their picture and ours. One is that for them, you're born in sin, which is not your fault. From our point of view, every human being is a slice of Adam and Eve's soul. So we were all there, and we all participated in the failure. And we are living out the consequences of our participation in the failure. So we are responsible for this degraded condition. That's one glaring difference. The other glaring difference, at least according to some elements of Christianity, is that you can do nothing to repair it. It's absolutely unrepairable, and that's why, according to some elements of Christianity, in some incomprehensible way, God has to die to save you from your sin. From our point of view, anything you're responsible for, you can repair. Indeed, the program of the patriarchs was to repair the sin of Adam. And when we went to Sinai to receive the Torah, the repair was finished. And we were immortal. Just as Adam was created immortal, so we were immortal also. The repair was finished. And they faced a challenge, as they faced a challenge, and we failed just as they failed. So it's simply not true that it's irreparable. So here you have a kernel of an idea. Did their failure change conditions for mankind? Yes. And are we suffering from that? Yes, but we participated in it and we can repair it. That's a gigantic difference, and that colors their whole theology.
So now we're repairing the sin of the golden calf?
Yeah, we're repairing it, and that's quite true. We're repairing that. I have said something in the name of the Ramchal, from whom I take almost all these ideas. I have a chavrusa with whom we learn Ramchal. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I'm not positive that I'm wrong, but it could be that I made a mistake. Adam and Chava were in the Garden of Eden, and they faced a challenge. They failed at that challenge. Now, according to many sources, this is not well known, but according to many sources, it was a double challenge. They were forbidden to eat from the tree of knowledge. They were commanded to eat from the other trees. Actually, in the verses, that's almost explicit. And according to the Ramchal, the other trees are connected to the tree of life. Indeed, they are just spin-offs from the tree of life, which means they were commanded to eat from the tree of life. So it was eat from the tree of life and don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It was a double challenge. One, eating from the tree of life corresponds to bringing holiness into the world, and not eating from the tree of knowledge corresponds to conquering the force of evil that is in the world. Those were two separate challenges. And by the way, according to this literature, Jacob and Esau had that split. Esau was not born evil. He was not intended to be evil. It's just that his challenge was to face evil directly, interact with it, and conquer it. Jacob's challenge was to bring holiness into the world from the source of holiness. Two separate challenges. When Esau failed at his challenge, we had to take it over. Now we face the double challenge. At any rate, there are those two challenges in the Garden of Eden. The failure of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil caused the degradation of the world. What we go through now is a repair of the failure of eating from the tree of good and evil. What about the positive responsibility of eating from the tree of life? So my chavrusa pointed out to me several places in Utsato where it sounds like that challenge yet has to be fulfilled. So when we get back to the original condition, an equivalent to the condition of the Garden of Eden, we still will have something to do, but there won't be a tree of knowledge of good and evil there, because now we are repairing that damage, and once that damage is repaired, it's not going to recur. I used to think we didn't have to do anything, but now I'm beginning to think I was wrong about that. Yeah.
Not everybody sinned in the golden calf. All the women didn't do anything.
That's true. Not everybody failed and of course, Moses didn't fail. Moses was on the mountain, right? Yeshua didn't fail. He was on the mountains. Some say the Levites didn't fail. So if you're asking, but then why did they become mortal? The answer is that it's an all or nothing proposition vis-a-vis the Jewish people. Because the Jewish people collectively embody this presence of the original status of Adam in the world. And if a large segment is not going to be present, the rest can't do it alone. They have to do it with. I imagine that if there are individuals in all the categories who got left behind, all the categories are represented, so then you might be able to handle it. All the tribes have to be represented, that's for sure. So that's.
So when we were leaving Egypt, most of them didn't want to leave, but the few that did want to leave were granted to leave. So the opposite effect happened.
Well, the other ones died.
Correct.
So
why didn't that happen? There you go.
Oh, so there you have to understand. Yeah, because here you have to understand what happened with the golden calf. There's a long schmooze that's recorded. I just gave it last week, but I'll just repeat the headlines. The sin of the golden calf for 1,190,000 approximately of the Jews over the age of 20, men and women, was to create a replacement for Moses. It was not idol worship. That's explicit in the verses. It's explicit in the verses. If you read them all, read them carefully, it's explicit in the verses. Only about 10,000 wanted it as idol worship, and they died. They did die. The Levites killed approximately 3,000, and there was a plague whose number is unspecified, but there was a census directly afterwards, and the difference in numbers are trivial. So almost everyone wanted it as a replacement for Moses. It was not idol worship. And that's also a crime, the way they did it, and it's a crime for which they suffered in certain ways, but it's not the crime of idol worship, and the ones who were guilty of idol worship did in fact die on the spot. So the outcome was not different.
Shouldn't we still be immortal then and not get that punishment?
No, the crime of wanting a replacement for Moses is a crime. It's enough of a crime to become mortal. But it's not enough of a crime to have to die instantly. There, when they didn't want to leave, there was no third alternative. Set up a commune someplace in the lower Egypt Delta and make baskets and put them on the international market. That was not. It was either leave and go out and receive the Torah at Sinai, or you have no place in the world. Yeah.
Perhaps you can see a parallel to this idea when Jewish people sin. God doesn't say, well, I'm going to keep you, Moshe, and all the people who are innocent. He says, I'll start with Moshe and then we'll carry on from there. I'll wipe everybody out because of a few sin, and I'll keep Moshe. So it's a parallel with, if a few of them sin, the Jewish people as an Am have failed, in which case we have to start again. Could be a parallel to the idea of the immortality.
Yeah, but I'm more bothered by the question in your words than you're using the idea. How could God say to Moses, I'm going to wipe out the whole people if the women, the Levites, and those under 20 can't be counted?
The parallel, it's a bit rough.
That's a majority. That's a majority. And they say that the punishment for the spies was really the time of the punishment for the golden calf, but he didn't want to. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. That's a good question. Why? How can, unless God was just doing it to provoke Moses' answer, but still, it shouldn't be. That's not true. I don't know what to say about that. I'd rather bleib fair. Rather admit that I don't understand it than try to apply it the way you're trying to apply it. Something needs more thought there. I'm glad you mentioned it. Thank you. Yeah.
If you're equating the golden calf and Adam eating from the tree and its consequences, and that everything that we had before Matan Torah, with immortality and pain in childbirth.
No, I'm not going that far. By the way, let me just, since you mentioned it again, let me just tell you what the Shem Shmuel says. The Torah was given on what day of the week? On Shabbos. Gemara says everybody agrees it was given on Shabbos. Now there is a disagreement about whether Moses added an extra day. God said, prepare yourself for 2 days, and we see the Torah on the third. Moses' statement to the people makes it sound like prepare yourself for 3 days, and we see the Torah on the fourth. If we received it on Shabbos and Moses added an extra day, that means it was supposed to be given on? Friday, right? Friday. And we were immortal at that point. Is that ringing some bells? On what day of the week was Adam created? On Friday. And he was immortal. And he was given his challenge on Friday. Says the Shem Shmuel, what God wanted was an exact replay of the Garden of Eden. Exact replay. And Moses said, no. No, I don't want that. Why not? Because what happened with the Garden of Eden? When they failed, they were kicked out. So it would follow. I'm inviting the Jewish people into this special relationship with me. I'm offering the Torah on Friday, and there is a snake, what's called the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude of non-Jews who joined the Jewish people coming out of Egypt, and they were the ones who instigated it. There's a snake. The whole thing is set up. Well, what will happen if they fail? Which is, in fact, what happened. They did fail. So Moses said to God, make it on Shabbos, because Shabbos comes only from above. We have no hand in making Shabbos, creating Shabbos. We don't create the day of Shabbos. The day built into the calendar since the creation. If you do it on Shabbos, then it has only you as source, not we as a source. And since you are fixed and eternal, relationship with the Jewish people will be fixed and eternal. If you did it on Friday, it would be a partnership, and a partnership is just as strong as its weakest partner. And we would be the weak partner. God consented, made it on Shabbos, which means that it can't be broken. Now, there's a difference between the original Garden of Eden on the one hand, and what reality in our world could represent the principle of the Garden of Eden. They are not the same. The original Garden of Eden was created in a condition that we don't have in our world. But as you look at our world, you can identify those elements which express in our world what could be understood as representative of that. I'll just give you a rough analogy. Democracy was born in Athens. Every decision was made by a direct vote. All the citizens voted. Now, if someone will have that Athenian picture in mind and look at contemporary governments, he's not going to find it anywhere. Nowhere in the world is every decision taken by direct vote of all the citizens. Still, if he's looking for something that represents an analogy to the idea, he will not find it in China. He will not find it in Egypt. He will not find it in Iran. And he will find it in the parliamentary representative democracies of the West and others who have followed the lead of the West. So even though it's not a direct vote on every issue, still we elect representatives vote, there are periodic elections, and they're free, and so forth and so on. So that would be what represents the same idea. We are in a condition where we can't duplicate the Garden of Eden. We can't duplicate the condition of Adam. But that in our world, which represents the same principle, is the Jewish people standing before Sinai. That's why this period of slavery in Egypt was necessary. It was necessary to purify us from the results of that terrible failure in the Garden of Eden, so we can stand there without that payload of pollution, which would make it impossible for us to respond to the injection of Torah from heaven. But it's not identical, and therefore it doesn't have to be with all the conditions that you're thinking of.
My question is with regards to sin. The sin of eating from the tree and the sin of the golden calf both made us mortal again. Right. So they seemingly on a similar plane.
In that respect. But you started to talk about childbirth and things like that. The other elements in the curses may not be applicable.
Now the sin of eating from the tree was a direct violation of what God said. Versus the sin of the golden calf for 99% of the people was, you say, a philosophical crime of doing what God didn't tell you to do. Right. How are those two equal? How are those two on the same plane? If the sins aren't on the same plane, how are the consequences on the same plane?
Okay, I'll tell you briefly how Rav Dessler explains the sin of Adam, and then I think you'll see that they're directly on the same plane. No one has asked me this question this way before, but the way you asked it, Rav Dessler has a direct treatment of that. Various sources describe Adam as incapable of a deliberate crime. Some put it this way, that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, was external to him. That's this picture of the snake as an external being talking to him from the outside rather than from the inside. Nefesh Chaim writes about this, Rav Dessler writes about this, others. He's incapable of a deliberate sin. Okay, so how did he fail? He had to represent it to himself as good, as the right thing to do. The failure is a failure of rationalization. Then here's how it works. God said, don't eat from the tree. He's incapable of deliberate crime, deliberate disobedience. Now he makes a calculation. Okay, I won't eat. I was commanded not to eat, and I won't eat. Why am I not eating? Because I'm incapable of deliberately violating God's will. So what's the accomplishment? What good does it do? God created squirrels to climb trees, and he created butterflies to fly, and he created me to follow his orders. In what way is this a sanctification of God's name in the world? In what way does this praise God's name in the world? I'm just a creature doing what it's created to do. Why does he need people? Why isn't he happy with horses doing what he wants them to do? And butterflies doing what they want to do? Wouldn't it be better, he said to himself, wouldn't it be better if I eat from the tree, internalize the evil inclination, become capable of deliberate transgression, and then refrain? Go through the battle of struggle, self-mastery, and refrain. Wouldn't that be a much greater sanctification of God's name? You'll tell me, who needs your calculations? God said no. I know, but in Jewish law, there's something called Horah Shah. Horah Shah means that the court can decide to break a law for the sake of a greater sanctification of God's name. That's built into Jewish law. The courts can always do it under certain conditions that prophets can do it. Elijah offered sacrifices to God in Mount Carmel, which is against the law, and he's not criticized for doing it. He did it because it was a greater sanctification of God's name. So Adam says, I know the content of the Torah. I know this legal principle. So the fact that God said no, since I can figure out that there would be a greater sanctification of his name if I eat, obviously God wanted me to figure that out, and he wanted me to use this legal principle of violating the law once for a greater sanctification of his name in order to create that greater sanctification. That was his rationale. It'll become a rationalization in a moment, but so far it's a rationale. Now, after you hear that, it sounds pretty good, actually. I mean, where's the flaw? Says Rav Dessler, speaking as a Baal Musar and a philosopher, he says, Adam was flawed in his introspection to analyze his own real motivation. He portrayed the scenario to himself in the following terms. If I just do what God told me, if I don't eat from the tree and internalize the Yetzer Hara, the inclination, then the sanctification of God's name in the world will be trivial. That's how he portrayed to himself his motivation. The truth was, his motivation was this. If I just refrain from eating the tree because that's the way God created me, then my role in sanctifying God's name will be trivial. I will be trivial. What was I created for? What did I accomplish? This is a spiritual ego. It's a spiritual ego. And if you attribute insights like that to the Far East or to Buddhism and so forth and so on, we antedate them by at least 1,000 years. That was the challenge. The challenge was to agree that you should be nothing. In spirituality, we're not talking about money and power and pleasure, wealth, health, strength. We're talking about spirituality. And you have to agree to be nothing in spirituality. To be a zero. To follow God's will, even though you become a zero. That was his failure to introspect deeply enough to see where his motivation was coming from. That was his failure. That means that he acted, but he rationalized it to himself. Now I've gotten to the point where I can call it rationalization. He rationalized to himself that he was doing what God wanted. And that was the failure. That's very close to the golden calf. They rationalize it into something which needs to be done even in order to be able to serve God. So the crimes now are very similar to one another. You should read that. By the way, this is translated. A few years ago, they translated, Rav Dessler put out, now I think 6 volumes, of Michtav Milio. Not all of it is translated. But his essays on the weekly portions was translated a few years ago, so it exists in English. And in the first one, which deals with the first Torah reading in the year, he has this essay. So it's very worthwhile to read. What else? You have a question?
It's just following up from the previous question asked on this topic, that if we conclude that theoretically anything you do can't really actually cause a consequence, so even if I do, let's say, take the example of somebody who smokes cigarettes, you won't actually cause them the cancer. It might result, but it's not a direct cause of the smoking, it's a result of the sin. And
Talk about some of the vocabulary got past me now. What's the consequence you're talking about? Getting sick?
Yeah.
And you say it's not a consequence of the smoking, but it's a consequence of the
sin.
I don't think we would say either of those. Nothing you do creates consequences. The consequences are all God's direct creations. Nothing causes anything. Nothing you do causes anything to happen. All you have under your control is your decisions. After that, motions of the body, and all the consequences are God's response. Now, it may be the fact that what you did was a sin is what God is responding to you by making this happen, or not. But it's not that your physical actions can't cause consequences, but your sins can cause consequences.
May cause it.
No, it cannot. It can't cause anything. You have no causation. You have no causal power. Everything that happens downstream from your decision is God's response to you. Whether what you do is a mitzvah or a sin or neutral makes no difference.
But based on your changed position in life,
what you mean to say is
merit,
he's responding to that aspect of what you did.
Right.
They don't use the word cause, because cause is a false picture. Yeah, go ahead.
and consequently somebody does something which is permitted, and that has a natural cause for sometimes having a risk of something else that obviously can't be the cause of it, or even be related to it because it was permitted for him to do it. So why would
You're
it?
still stuck with causation. You're stuck with causation. Yeah, I'm just registering another caution here. The idea of causation here is not a correct idea. But anyway, okay. You want to talk about something that's neutral? Okay.
So if that's so, then why would there ever be a point of not taking a risk, or conversely, let's say in the case of somebody who's got a high chance of something, taking a test which isn't part of his Stadlers, because it won't help him in the long run, sort of thing. Let's say he does take a test and it cures a disease which they find, but he would have, that suffering is coming to him either way, sort of thing. So what's the point of doing it?
If I understand you correctly, the answer is on the surface. The doing of it itself will change your status.
No, because he wasn't commanded to do that. He didn't have any chiyuv b'shtadlus. He had no
Well,
obligation.
if you have no obligation of taking naturalistic efforts, then it's forbidden.
Right.
So there's no neutral position here. There's no neutral position here. Rav Desser has a long essay on Bitochen and Shtadlus, and he quotes the Mesilas Yesharim, who says that the necessity of naturalistic causation is a tax. It's part of the curse that was given to Adam and Chava. It's a tax, and the Torah does not intend you should volunteer to pay taxes. You pay what you're taxed to do, and the rest of the time you don't make naturalistic choices or naturalistic efforts. You spend your time doing mitzvahs. You have no right to delete time from doing mitzvahs to do naturalistic efforts when you're not obligated to make those naturalistic efforts. Yeah.
I've got a question, but just to, well, maybe this will count as the question. Before I ask the question, I just want to prefix it with, I'm not accusing, it's an idea that I've got that I'm curious if it's the same as the description of causation with us and God. I'm not saying we got it from an outside source, I'm just curious if the outside source parallels it. An idea called occasionalism.
Yeah.
Chap called Goering.
Yeah.
John Sorrow was defending his position, and he was accused of that.
The accusers, beyond belief. Okay.
Does it parallel our position?
There's two issues here, and I'm not enough of an expert on medieval Arabic philosophy to comment on what occasionalism requires. There are two different issues here which have to be kept apart. It's hard to keep them apart. People's minds slip from one to the other. I heard this first from Yaakov Weinberg, the son of the Bracha, many years ago. When you talk about how God runs the world, you can talk about what he does, how far it reaches, how detailed it is, versus why he does it, what purposes it fulfills, what are the goals for what he does. Those are two separate issues. Now, if you're talking about what he does, it is a very well-represented position that he does everything. He does everything short of human decisions. One question will be, how? Does he do things with direct individual, in his case causation, which really is creation? Or does he create general tendencies, which then operate according to general rules, but they're both his activity, and since he knows all of the consequences, the distinction between them is very, very subtle. Not a gross distinction at all. It's all his activity. That's what he does. Why he does it, of course, varies from person to person and community to community. Maimonides, in his introduction to the Mishnah, gives the following example. One person becomes very wealthy, and he decides to build a palace in the forest for his vacations, puts up a high wall. Years later, a great righteous person is wandering through the forest, he's tired, and he's hot, sees the wall, he says, oh, look at that. Look at the shade. Cool breeze, sits down, puts his back against the wall, enjoys the shade. The first man became wealthy so that the second man would have comfort and shade. Now, does that mean that the first man became rich because God wanted him to be rich? You bet. God made the first person rich, but he made him rich so that there would be war for the second guy. The purpose of it was for the second guy. Don't confuse what God does and how detailed it is on the one hand with why he does it. Now, I don't know how occasionalism works, whether it works only on the extent of what's being done or why it's being done. If occasionalism means that each thing is done for itself, this fly falls into the water and dies here because the powers that be want this fly dead here and now, we certainly disagree with that. But if it means that God makes things happen, and they're all made to happen by him, then many of our authorities hold that way. Some would hold it individually, and some would hold it by an intermediary of something more general, but that it's all God's activity and he foresees all the consequences. I think that difference is very trivial. Very, very trivial.
Is there any point, based on what I was saying, to avoid a risk which is permitted?
Avoid a risk which is permitted. I think you need some positive reason for which the risk is being permitted. It needs a heter, as we would say. Rav Moshe had a tshuva. Someone asked him, is it permissible to take a job that's dangerous? And he said, yes. It's an explicit statement in the Talmud. Because the Talmud says, if you have a hired worker and you have to pay him a daily wage, don't delay the payment. Don't delay the payment. Why? Because the verse describes the hired worker in terms of his payment as Ki'elav hu noseh es nafsho. He lifts up his soul for that payment. Rav Moshe says one of the things people were paid to do in ancient times was gather fruits from trees. Sometimes you could knock them down from the tree. Sometimes you have to climb the tree and climb out on the branch to gather the fruit. And that's dangerous. So the verse is saying, and the Talmud is quoting it that way, the verse is saying, he risked his life to work for you. Don't delay his wages. Don't delay his wages. So Moshe said, the Talmud is telling you, he risked his life in order to work for you. So that means taking a risk for your livelihood is permissible. Now, of course, I mean, if you're an anesthesiologist, you know very well that the average lifespan of anesthesiologists is considerably shorter than the lifespan of, because there are mistakes with radiation. There are leaks in radiation and there are problems. So, of course, if you're an anesthesiologist, you just try to work in a hospital or a laboratory that's well protected. So that's the thing. But once you see that it's because it's for his profession that he's allowed to do it, I think that just trivially taking a risk may not be permitted. Now you say, well, what about walking in the forest? Well, people need rest. People need relaxation. People need to enjoy the beauties of nature. So I said yesterday in my chair, and so we have they say, yeah, but 1 in 10,000 people dies in a snake bite and falls into a pit. Okay, maybe that level of risk is worthwhile if you really need to have the rest of the recreation and aesthetic stimulation that a hike in the forest can give you. So then, indeed, it's a risk, but it'll have some positive benefit that the Torah recognizes, which gives it legitimacy. But just to take risks, why do I do skydiving? Because I like to be in dangerous situations. Gives me a thrill. Probably not. Probably not. Yeah.
Is just a question I was curious about asking for a long time. Is the Messianic views of the Lubavitch community considered to be heresy by most of Torah Jewry?
Look, there are many such views. The community is split into 3 or 4 different camps, and there are many such views. There is, I always forget, there's a famous family, the Lubavitch family, several of whose members are professors of philosophy. Maybe one of you will think of it. And one of them wrote an article, Jewish Action, not long after the passing of the Lubavitcher Rabbi. At that time, he said there were 3 groups. Now, this is the Lubavitcher writing about Lubavitch. And he said, some believe that the Lubavitcher Rabbi is God. Period. Full stop. God. They are heretics, and they have to be treated like heretics. Period. No question. Some believe that he didn't mention this group because I don't know if it was so prominent then. Some believe that he's still alive. They're like people having hallucinations or children who can't tell the difference between what's obviously true and obviously false. Then there are those who say that he was the Messiah. That depends on what they mean. If they mean he was a worthy candidate of becoming the Messiah, like the Rambam writes in Hilchos Malachim, that a person who has certain qualities has the right to be presumed as a candidate to be Messiah, and we should follow him. When Rabbi Akiva followed Bar Kochba, he wasn't wrong. He wasn't right. Didn't make a mistake. He followed him because he had what was called Cheskas Mashiach. There's a legal presumption that he was Mashiach. And you have to follow such a person and do your best to make the presumption come true. But as the Rambam writes, when he died without fulfilling the promises of the Mashiach, then we know that he didn't succeed in becoming the Mashiach. If they want to say that about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Many Hasidic groups held that way. There are sources that say in every generation the soul of the Mashiach is there, ready to be able to do what the Mashiach has to do if the circumstances will develop that way. If someone wants to believe that his leader is the one who carries that soul, there's nothing wrong with that. If someone goes on to say that no one else could because only he, and it's got to be a resurrection and so on and so on, that's going too far. As he said, some misread Rashi and Sanhedrin and come out with false conclusions. So he said, how should you treat them? Treat them as people who misread a Rashi and Sanhedrin and came out with false conclusions. Whatever you think is appropriate for a person who makes a mistake in reading a Rashi and comes out with false conclusions, that would be the appropriate way to treat that as well.
So it's not so fair fight, basically.
There are different groups, and each group has to get the treatment that it deserves. Yeah.
Is there any significance in the Code of Hammurabi having the same language as Torah and saying an eye for an eye?
Sure. The significance of it is that our Masorah goes back to Adam. Our Masorah goes back to Adam. Shem had a yeshiva teaching Torah. It wasn't Torah that he made up. It wasn't just intuitions about how to write poems to God. The knowledge of the Torah was something which was in the world from the time of Adam, and Hammurabi is a spin-off. The fact that it's before the Torah, it's a spin-off. Some of our sources became available to other people. No one dreamt in our tradition that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah to, the Avos kept all the mitzvos. That's hundreds of years before the Torah was given, right? No one dreamt that when the God gave the Torah to the world, the Jewish people said, wow, look at all this new stuff. Unanticipated, unheard of, completely brand new. No, that's not our picture at all.
But then he missed the meaning of the words, though.
Sure. What would you expect? He didn't have a Jewish context in which to place it. So he used the words and he didn't understand what the intent of the words was. Yeah. It's not so. By the way, as the Maharal explains, when you have words and the tradition says that they're not to be taken literally, that doesn't mean that their literal usage is worthless, useless, with no communication. Maharal says an eye for an eye means that's what you deserve. That's what you deserve. And a monetary payment is in place of that which you really deserve. If you apply logic to it, like the Gemara does, the Meforshim do, if you take an eye for an eye, suppose George, who has one functioning eye, puts out an eye of Fred, who has two functioning eyes. All right, what will you do now? An eye for an eye? If you take out George's other functioning eye, he ends up blind. But George didn't make Fred blind. So is that fair? If the Torah is trying to express parity, it's a poor way to do it. A poor way to do it. Indeed, if it's just merely a penalty without a condemnation, can a rich person get away with all sorts of destruction on the grounds that I have plenty of money, I'll pay for it. I'll firebomb your car, and I have to pay for it. No. It's something which is forbidden and carries a punishment of its own. The payment is only making it up to the person who suffered so that his life won't be as more disrupted than it has to be. But and then what you're saying to the person is, given what you did, this is what you deserve to happen to you. Yeah.
One Sherma I was listening to recently, you were discussing the difference between a Jewish and a non-Jewish soul.
Yeah.
And you said the criteria is the obligations that the particular soul has on it, in which case they're different. And a non-Jew can raise himself to a level of a Jew if he so desires. But wouldn't that mean a priest, a Levi, or a Kohen would have a different soul than a Yisrael?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything that is reflected in a different set of obligations means there's going to be a different quality of soul.
So, the reason it was a bit curious because you presented it as if this could be taken as bigoted to say that we have a different soul. But then throughout our own religion, within the own religion, we also have different souls. So in which case, it's not necessarily a scale of better or worse.
Oh, well, that's that's the thing you haven't argued for in anything you said up until you said those words. difference is not just difference. Not just difference. And the question is whether it's a categorical difference or whether it is a minor difference of variation. I have to quip it, I'll just tell you. We say in the morning 3 blessings to set our position in the world. Shlosani Koi, Shlosani Avish, Shlosani Isha. Those 3 categories didn't make me a non-Jew, didn't make me a slave, didn't make me a woman. They are based on the number of commandments that are addressed to each group. I have to identify the commandments that apply to me. There are about 65 that apply to non-Jews. It's 7 categories, not 7 commandments. And I have to identify myself as not belonging to that 65, but more. You didn't create me a slave, also a minimal number. A woman, there are about 15 commandments that are preferentially addressed to men over women. So in order to identify myself, I have to say that I'm a Jewish male. Of course, we say them negatively because I can't take credit for where I am. If I said, I could say all of them positive, She'asani Yisrael, She'asani Ben Chorin, She'asani Ish. But that sounds like I'm confident about my identity, that I'm doing what I ought to do, I'm fulfilling my responsibilities, which to a great extent isn't true, and therefore we put it in the negative. The question then arises, why doesn't a Kohen, since he's a different list of mitzvot, why shouldn't he have a blessing that he should say to identify his position? So he can't say Shasani Kohen because for the same reason that we don't make any of the blessings in the positive, he can't make it in the positive either. What shall he say? Shelo Asani Yisrael? That's false. Because a Kohen is a Kohen type Yisrael. He's not a separate category. He's not a separate category. That gives you an indication of the status of a Kohen. Okay, guys.